Morning, everybody. How are we doing today? My name is Dan. I'm the Jazz Shepherd, as I'm sure most of you know at this point. I've not cut my hair since this whole crazy pandemic thing started. So now we got the double ponytail going. Starting to get that hippie thing going on a little bit. But it's alright. I'm a shepherd, right? Shepherds don't crop themselves too much. Today we got a fun episode. We're going to do five records that took me a long time to find, that I finally found in the last few months. 5 records that I really want to find, my 5 most kind of wanted, and then 5 tone poets that I hope come out sometime in the next few years. And they've already set the schedule for the next 18 months. And there's a couple titles in there I'm excited about. There's a Sonny Clark, there's a Hank Mobley Curtain Call, which I've always kind of wanted to grab a copy of that. I never found a Japanese one for a decent price. I think there's a Jackie McLean, Jackknife maybe, is it? Coming out next fall, or actually this fall, 6-8 months from now. But again, it's been a pretty crazy year, and it's just good to try to find some normalcy. And these are always fun episodes, and I think people will enjoy them. I hope you all enjoyed that great guitar episode. I know it went pretty in depth. We ended up with 7 episodes, 5 on the history and 2 on the playlists. I think it's a great reference point for anybody wanting to understand the history of jazz guitar. And as I've said before, I learned a lot making it. I love jazz guitar, and I think it's a wonderful, light, refreshing tonic. And it's certainly something that I think most people would enjoy and make it an easy in to loving jazz. And ultimately, that's what any channel on here talking jazz should be about. How do we make people love jazz and remember how important and wonderful it is? There's too much of the buy the rare, scary, expensive stuff that no one else is going to want to listen to, and it's going to drive all your friends away from jazz. I don't understand that whole process. There's lots of rock and roll that has that same function, and it doesn't get championed in the same way that the avant-garde and jazz does. So I think guitar has an important gateway to allowing people into jazz. And as a DJ, I put it a lot in the clubs, and it always got a really nice warm response. And like I said, the guitar is something that the average white folk feels comfortable with. They know the guitar. And so even in the language of jazz, guitar is something they can relate to and feel very comfortable around. So anyway, we're going to start with 5 records that I finally found. It took me a long time to track down. And sometimes something's hard to find because A, all I can find is expensive copies that I'm not going to pay that much for. That can make one of the reasons why it's hard to find. B, sometimes it's just simply you can't find it at all. C, sometimes you can find it, but it's coming from a place where the shipping's going to double or triple the cost, and that can make you shy away from doing it. And D, sometimes you just want to wait for an original pressing. A lot of times I'd rather pay the same money for a kind of beat up original that will still play fine versus paying that kind of money, $80, $100 for shipping, for an imported Japanese or European pressing that the shipping is going to be half of my expense, and eventually I'm going to stumble on a North American one and be like, damn, here's one I should have waited. So there's a lot of different reasons that can make a record be hard for me to find. Like I said, the Pinky Winters one was the one that was for years I was trying to track that Argo record down. And Argo's going to feature in this episode a few times here, but first we're going to start with Bethlehem. For those of you who don't know the channel too well or me too well, I've been trying to collect the early releases of all the great jazz labels. And by early, I'm talking the first 100, 150 titles that label puts out. Some labels I have over 500 titles by, 400 titles by, 300 titles by. I believe there's 12 labels now I have over at least 100 titles from. And there's a couple that are on the doorstep of getting to that number. So there's a lot of great jazz labels out there, but I'm trying to fill in those cracks, trying to learn the history. And it's when you start to see all the releases from all these labels compiled, including the ones that are well known and the ones that are completely obscure, the artists that are well known, how many well known artists does a label have, how many records and artists on a label have we completely forgotten about, the racial makeup, how black is a label, how white is a label, the distribution. There's all these things you learn by filling in the discography. How cutting edge were they? How modern were they? How retro were they? These are all things you learn by filling in a label's discography. And there's a complete narration or story that unfolds when you start to see release after release after release, especially in chronological order. And then you start to cross-reference those labels with the other labels at that same time frame. You start to really see what label was leading the pack when, who was very much kind of retrospective, who was only cutting edge, how long an impact some labels have. Some labels' impacts are very short. And we're going to start off with Bethlehem here. And Bethlehem is one of those labels that had a very short but impactful window. They kind of start in 1953 with Gus Wilde. Creed Taylor's part of the package early in the days. They have some early success with Chris Connor, the great singer. That convinces them to kind of go down more of a jazz path. They launch a great 10-inch series, and I have all the titles in that. There's about 37, I believe. So I completed that. I completed the BCP series, which is from 1 to 81 titles, and that's incredible stuff. It's just great titles. That and the 10-inch series from 53 to about 56. Bethlehem's doing some really great stuff. And at some point in 56, they launched a 6,000 series. And the difference between the 6,000 and the BCP series is kind of hard to define. But there's a lot fewer titles in the 6,000 series. They seem to be somewhat a little bit poppier jazz, but it's not clear cut. There's a lot of vocal stuff in the 6,000, but there's vocal stuff in the BCP and in the 10-inch series. So again, there's not like this clear, this is our poppy stuff, this is our jazz stuff like at Atlantic. It's much more hard to define. Why they switched to 6,000, I've not been able to find that in my research. And the 6,000 series goes about 30-some titles. And then Bethlehem starts to go into somewhat of a decline, and they end up selling to King Records out of Cincinnati. And then King starts adding titles to the late 6,000 sequence that weren't Bethlehem artists or Bethlehem sessions. They were completely sessions that they had recorded that were in their vaults. Some of it was even stuff that they had issued on the King label. They also absorb another label, I can't think of it right now, in 55 or so, and they re-released some of that stuff. So it's kind of a convoluted history. So I completed the BCP, I completed the 10-inch, and it was the 6,000 series where I was the last one that I hadn't really completed. And there's a number of titles I've tried to find these last year or so, and I haven't been buying a lot, in part because of COVID and my unemployment situation. But I did find a few of these titles at the Frank Minion records I've showed you, and those are fantastic. But this Harold Owsley record, has avoided my grasp for a long time. There was plenty of times I searched for it, I couldn't even find a copy. I finally, in my want to finish off that sequence, got a copy from Italy. And the shipping wasn't too bad, and it didn't take that long to get here. And I've often hesitated to buy from Italy because I've heard people have had some bad experiences with the shipping, But out of my frustration and my completionist mindset, I finally grabbed it. And it's a great record. He's a Chicago-based player. Here he's playing with the great trombone player Julian Priester. Probably 56, maybe 57. I don't think it's going to have a date on the back. This is, of course, by the time King has taken over. You can see Cincinnati, Ohio on the background here. This is a Fresh Sounds Spanish repressing of this record. Original ones are tough to come by. It's a great record. Charles Davis is on the baritone sax, and Julian Priester's on the trombone, along with Harold Owsley on the tenor. And so you have the tenor, the baritone, and the trombone, which are all kind of that lower range of the horn sections. So there's a lot of really low end kind of movements and swishing back and forth. The rhythm section is made up of a guy named Philip Wright on the piano, Tommy Williams on the bass, and Walter Perkins, of course, on the drums. Great record. It's a pretty cool cover. Tough record to find. And I've enjoyed listening to it the last few days. I've had it for about 3-4 weeks, but I hadn't gotten to listening to it. When I do those in-depth series like the guitar, it's really preoccupying my time. And believe it or not, it's hard sometimes to sit down and listen to records and kind of ingest them when you're working on something, doing research and reading and trying to file records and pull stuff out. You can put it on and listen to it, but you don't really digest it or hear it. And so oftentimes with new stuff, I hesitate to play it in that climate because you can hear it and not hear it. You cannot ingest any of it because you were so wrapped up in what you were doing. And I don't find that to be the best setting for listening to a new record that I'm excited to hear. And so often I'll sit on a new record until the timing is right. So that was the first record, and now that's got my Bethlehem sequence nearly completed, minus a bunch of, when they go to King issues a whole bunch of compilations. They add 10 titles onto the BCP series, and they're really hard to find. They aren't synonymous or congruous with the time frame. They get added on later. But it's a lot of it's from the Bethlehem vaults. Most of it's all stuff that's already been released on Bethlehem. Some of it from King. And then they also do some best, greatest compilation stuff in the 6000 series as well. And I don't have hardly any of those. And I'm not really interested in finding them. And like I said, I often search Discogs and even eBay by label. And it's pretty weird how infrequently those titles have shown up. And the 11 or 10 records that come out after BCP 81, they tack those 10 compilations on. They all have kind of weird hits. This is our bread and butter, weird titles like that. And I've actually seen them a few times kind of as a set. But I've never grabbed them. Don't really need them. I have all the music. So if I stumble on them at a good price, maybe I'll grab them. So it leaves only one Bethlehem record that I need to grab, and you'll hear about that in the next session. Another record I wanted to get for a long time, because I'm a big fan of Pepper Adams. It's his Critics' Choice record on Pacific Records. And again, the sequence kind of plays an interesting role here. Pacific in 1955 launches their 12-inch series with the 1200 series, and they run it all the way through to 1299. And I think some of those titles actually kind of were added on at the end as well. But I think around 1270 or 1280 they relaunch a new series called the 400 series, which is number 407. And this only runs 12 titles, the 400 series, for some reason. And then they relaunch again with the PJ1 up into 150, 200 or so. And that becomes one of the soul jazz era of Pacific Records. But there's still some really great titles there in the PJ series. So again, labels sometimes will have different sequences. And you gotta try to delve out which are the most jazz oriented. And in this case, they're all fairly jazz oriented. And why they switched it up, they don't explain that. They just do. Why is there 12 titles in the 400 sequence? And why did they not continue that? And why did they move on to the PJ1? Who knows? With the PJ1 series, they do kind of change up the graphic look. And so maybe they just wanted to have a fresh start. And the graphics in that PJ series are definitely different than what they were doing here in the 1200 and in the 400 series. But I kind of ignored the 400 series initially because it was only 12 titles. I'm like, maybe they're in budget, and I didn't really pay too much attention at first. This is a couple years ago. I started collecting the 1200 early stuff, and of course the 10-inch stuff when I found it. But I realized at some point that the 400 series has some great titles in it. So I've slowly been grabbing those too. And in that process, in that time frame, Pepper Adams has become quite collectible. And so this record often goes for near $100. And I kept trying to bid on it on eBay and auctions, and was never lucky enough to be able to win one. And I was always kind of frustrated by that because I'm a big Pepper Adams guy. And he's not a guy that had a ton of sessions as a leader. He works at Blue Note a lot with Donald Byrd and company, and doesn't get a leader session. But he does get a few here and there at different labels. And this specific one had always kind of eluded me. And I finally found one on eBay about 6 weeks ago, and it was from a seller that had very few followers. And anything that's going to be auctioned by a seller with very few followers, and especially if it's not like Coltrane or Miles, where people are just searching those artists all the time, a guy with very few followers can only send out some emails alerting there's new content on my page. A Carolina Soul that's got thousands of followers, the second they have a new auction, thousands of people are noticing and go looking through it. And you're going to actually pay more than you should if you buy a Carolina Soul or some of those other big auction houses. But this was from a seller with very few followers, like 17. So I'm like, ooh, here's a chance for me to get this at a good price. I think they were asking $30 for it. And I think I bid on it, and I think I got it for $30. I don't think anyone else even bid on it. And I was excited. You know, the top seam is split, but I don't really mind that none. The music's fantastic. Pepper Adams was a great baritone player. The great Jimmy Rowles is on the piano. Doug Watkins is on the bass. Mel Lewis is on the drums. And then a guy by the name of Lee Katzman's on the trumpet, who I honestly can't tell you too much about. It says here, Pepper Adams, winner of the New Star Award for the baritone saxophone from the Jazz Critics Poll, 1957 and Downbeat. And so that tells you how Pepper Adams was being seen. And again, being a white player, he gives them the advantage of being viewed by the white voters. And so there's a real advantage in being white when it comes to all those jazz polls and critics polls. Your distribution and your vantage point and the people who could vote for you is just so much greater. So you see a lot of these polls being dominated by white jazz musicians. But Pepper's a great guy. He's from Detroit. Part of that Donald Byrd, Tommy Flanagan, Paul Chambers, the Jones brothers. Detroit's such a great school for the great jazz players. And this record I was thrilled to finally pull it down. It's great stuff and fits in nicely with his late 50s work. So that's on Pacific, and the title Worth Finding. So now, Argo is a label I love, and I talked about them quite a bit, especially when we were out of the Pinky Winters and some of the great artists on Argo Records. Argo is from Chicago. They're affiliated with Chess Records by Phil and Leonard Chess. I pretty much have completed their discography up to the point where they changed their name to Cadet, which is about 140, 150 titles. And there's a little period where the crossover where albums get released on both Cadet and Argo. But for the classic Argo stuff, I wanted to complete that early first 5-6 years of the Argo label. And I pretty much had completed it, minus that Pinky Winters and a couple collections and one other record, which we're going to talk about in my most sought after records. The two collections I couldn't come tracking down, and often that's what the last things I grab, is this Fanfare Hits, which I just finally got in the mail, and then Remember the Oldies. And this is 649, 656. So they appear pretty close together in the Argo discography. And they both took me a long time to find. I've only seen this one for sale once. What the guy wanted for was a little more than I wanted to pay. I messaged him once. He didn't respond. I let it go for a few months and I responded. Then I messaged him again and we made it a deal. And I got this. And it's a cool record. It's kind of a collection, but it's not a collection of like their big hits. It's a collection of Clifton Chenier, Eddie Fontaine, the Daps, the Pastels, the Ravens, Bobby Charles, Billy Stewart. So it seems to be more of the blues R&B side and early rock and roll even. But it's a cool cover. Shows some cool 7 inches there, obviously. And I was quite happy to finally track that down. And just Remember the Oldies. Another great cover. And this one seems to document more the New Orleans, but not so much the Dixieland. It's got some Dixieland, but it's got 3 souls on it. So Paul Gay, Jody Williams, Clifton Chenier again, Eddie McDuff. So again, it's cool stuff. And both of these titles had never been reissued, which Argo has that be the case quite frequently. there's a lot of great Argo records that have never managed to be reissued in any form. And it makes these records tough to find. You know, it really does. But as a completist and as someone who wants to get the full picture, it was something I needed to have. And so I now only need one Argo, and we'll talk about that in the next section as well. Now this is a record I've looked for a couple of years. And I've been trying to complete the Savoy discography from 12,000 to about 12,150. And I completed the first 100 a few months ago. That's why I did my Savoy first 100 releases. And they were a pretty successful label, 55, 56, 57, putting out a lot of titles. A lot of it was known artists like Parker and Hawkins and pretty famous names. As we approach 58, 59, and we move to 12,100, that next 50 records ends up being a lot more obscure names. Young Yusef Lateef has a lot of records there, and he was unknown at that point. Those records are really hard to find and very expensive. Again, we're talking a label that there's going to be a number of titles that were never reissued, which makes them tough to find. So the 12,100 sequence is actually proving tougher to complete than the 12,000 series, which is older. But I managed to fill in most of that first 50 of that 12,100 sequence. And there's still 2 left that I'm going to talk about again in the next part. But this one was one of the most elusive ones. The Changing of the Guard at Buckingham Palace. It's the great Dizzy Reese on trumpet and Tubby Hayes. And these guys are a couple of the United Kingdom's great jazz exports. And I can't recall if this was recorded in America or if this was recorded in the UK. But they're probably recorded in England because it's all British sidemen. Harry South, Dickie Hodden, Billy Iden, Phil Samon, Lenny Bush, Terry Shannon. But it's great stuff. Tubby Hayes is a great tenor sax player. This record, I believe, does have a Japanese reissue. But try as I might, I could not win this record. I could not track a copy down. And I'm a fan of both those players. So it wasn't like some of the records I'm looking for in these sequences where I don't even really know the artists. I just want to complete it for the information. I knew Tubby Hayes and I knew Dizzy Reese, of course, through Blue Note. So I really wanted this record. I just couldn't find it. And when I did see it, I couldn't win it. And to make matters even worse, there was a second cover that Savoy does here that has another kind of UK street scene on it, which would lead me often to thinking to myself, oh, that's that record? No, it's not. You know what I mean? I must have got excited a dozen times saying, oh, crap, that's that. And then I realized, no, that's the Sherry McPartland record, which this has another cover as well. So Savoy's a tricky label. It takes a lot to get to know it. Different covers. It's a lot of in-depth. But I finally saw one on eBay last month, and I was determined I was going to make my best effort to win it because I really wanted it. And it's the most I probably ever paid for a record. I think I paid 90 pounds, which is about 120 US dollars. And with shipping, it came to about 180, which again, that's more than I've ever spent on one record. But it's a beautiful, old, nice, vintage pressing. It's an American pressing that I found in the United Kingdom of 2 of the United Kingdom's greatest artists that I'm bringing back to America. So I'm happy to have this in my collection finally. And like I said, it now means I only need 2 more Savoys to complete the first 150, which is about really all I'm interested in. After that, they start phasing towards gospel, some rhythm and blues, and then some really obscure jazz that often kind of lends itself to being somewhat avant-garde, and Paul Bly, Billy Barron. There's some weird names. Not names that most people are going to even be familiar with. I will buy some of that stuff as I come across it. But I can tell you this, the later you go into the Savoy 12,000 series, in terms of jazz, the tougher and rarer those titles become. When they're reissuing Hawkins and Parker and Lester and Dizzy, even though all that stuff was from earlier eras, those names had ring, and so those titles sold, and it was a very fluid situation. But as we moved into the late 50s, most of those artists are long gone from the label, and they're really signing peripheral names that are really either just starting their, and that was always kind of their point in the mid 50s. Even the Hank Mobleys and Donald Byrds and Lee Morgans were pretty unknown when Savoy had their crack at them. And Savoy never kept their talent, they never paid their talent, and they change A&R guys at some point about 59, 60, and they start going very heavily towards gospel by 12,200. And then they also, in 12,200 or so, start reissuing early mono titles in the 12,000 series with a different cover and a different number and stereo. And that can lead to some confusing, oh, I don't have this number, I don't have this cover. But then you get them and you realize, oh, this is just a electronically reprocessed version of the mono original reissue. So again, it takes a lot of know-how to collect Savoy. And like, that's part of the information I want. So that's number 4 on this list. So the 5th title here on the list of records I finally tracked down was a record that, again, took me a long time to find. And it's on the New Jazz imprint, which is the affiliate of Prestige. And of the first 50 New Jazz titles, this is the only one I couldn't find. And it's by the great Jerome Richardson, who doesn't get a lot of titles as a leader. He's very much a prolific sideman, and his records as a leader are outstanding. He's a flautist and a sax player. He often finds himself working in very disparate settings, from kind of poppy vocal backings to some very deep, modern, post-bop, even edges of the avant-garde. I would tell you this, if Jerome Richardson's on a set, I'm going to be fairly inclined to like said set. I really like his body of work. This is just one of those, New Jazz in general are tougher to find than Prestige. Why that is, it's partly distribution, partly reissues were less frequent on the New Jazz. It seems to me there's more titles in the New Jazz lineup that OJC didn't reissue. The majority of the body of work of Prestige has been fairly available over the years. And the mild stuff, you'll find it in 24 different incantations. But this title for me was always really impossible to find. I don't believe OJC ever did it. They do to the other one, the oil wine, something about oil, Midnight Oil maybe. Beautiful. There's been that flute. It's fantastic. Poinciana. Again, great player. Super tough record to come by. I was watching on Discogs for probably a year for one to come available. There's a few originals out there for thousands of dollars, which again, that's never going to be my modus operandi. Finally, last month, one popped up from this Japanese reissue program here in America, and the seller was only asking $40. And I jumped at that. And normally before I purchase a record, I'll search their store and see what other titles I'm interested in. In this case, I didn't want to take any chance. I bought this, and then I searched their store to see what other titles they had, and I ended up buying probably 10 titles from this guy. And he worked with me on some of the other titles as well, so I probably ended up paying less than $40 for when you average the discounts I got. It's a great session. It's also got Richard Wines on the piano, George Tucker, and Charlie Persip. So nice little quartet. Nice, tight, crisp arrangements. And again, this record took me just the longest time to track down. Finally got it, and I'm quite thrilled about it. So that's the 5 records I finally found recently that took me a long time to find. Next, we're going to look at 5 records that I'm looking to find, my most 5 wanted. And I think we're going to save the Tone Poet stuff for the next episode. 5 Tone Poets I really hope that get put out. But the 5 records here that I'm really looking for right now, and if anybody sees these 5 records, please let me know. Well, number 1 is a record on Argo. It's probably not even a great record. It's by an Italian piano player. His name is Cesar Giovannini. He's got some other records on other labels that seem to be kind of somewhat easy listening, chamber jazz almost. Being on Argo, I'm guessing this one's going to have a little bit more blues to it, but it's not certainty. But Argo's definitely a fairly high quality production. They don't put out too much fluff. So if I had to guess, it's going to still be a fairly good. It's called Cesar Giovannini. It plays the Riviera, something like that. And it's got a picture of the French Riviera. It's like a gal on the cover, umbrella. A lot of songs. I think it's just piano solo. I tried to bid on a promo copy of it a few months ago on eBay. It was colored vinyl, but had a white jacket, no cover. And I think the promo only comes that way because I've seen another photo of it that same way. And I bid only like $26 because no one didn't think there was any interest on it. I lost it for $26.50, and I kind of been kicking myself since. But I didn't think anybody else was going to be looking at this record, so I didn't bid that high, and I didn't get it. And I've not seen another one for auction since. Discogs does have it listed, but I think only 2 people have it, and 7 people are looking for it. And I can't remember. I think it's been years since I had one for sale. And so I have Discogs set up to alert me if one shows up. But I've not seen one for sale with the cover, with the gal from the Riviera. You can Google image it and see that it has a cover. It was given a number. Having not ever had a chance to bid one or even see that cover with the record, there's a possibility that the cover was made. They put out the promo and they never actually issued the album. I don't know. But I've never come across it, and I'm looking for it. If you see an Argo record by Cesar Giovannini, let me know. It's the last Argo I need, and I want to finish that 600 into 750 series off, so I can close the book on that and say I kind of know that. And they continue under the Cadet name and become very much blues, jazz, R&B tinged going forward in the Cadet series. And I have a lot of that stuff as well. But it's the Argo stuff I really was interested in, the vintage. I love just those old 50s pressings. They're beautiful. So if you can see or find Cesar Giovannini, let a brother know. Number 2 on this list is the one Bethlehem I don't have. And it's by a New Orleans tradition guy named Leroy Parkins. Not Perkins, it's Parkins with an A. And I don't think Discogs even has this title listed. You can search Leroy Parkins and find something about Russia. And I've searched on other eBay, nothing. You can Google image the cover and find the cover. And I feel like I've even seen it over the years. But again, I'm close to my grasp in terms of buying. So Bethlehem Leroy Parkins, it's one that probably shouldn't cost a lot, just like the Cesar Giovannini shouldn't cost a lot. There can't be that many people looking for those titles. Only that would make them pricey at all is how rare they are. So Leroy Parkins, Cesar Giovannini, both of those will finish off my Bethlehem, all 3 sequences, and my Argo sequence will be finished off. That leads me to Savoy. And there's 2 Savoy titles that I really want to find. And they're both ostensibly Yusef Lateef sessions. The first one's called The Dreamer, and it's like 12,149, 12,000, right in that era, probably 1959. I have all of his other stuff pretty much on pretty much on every label, really, up until 1970 or so. He's a pretty prolific guy. I'm a big fan of Yusef. This is probably his last title on Savoy before he switches over to Prestige for a while. I just can't find this title, The Dreamer, for under $400. They're all really expensive, and Savoy Records at auction go for big bucks when they're by guys like Yusef Lateef. The last one I saw at auction of that went for probably $400. And so there's French reissues, I think on the BYG label, I think it is, maybe I can't remember exactly what label. There's a French reissue of the Dreamer record, but it's got a different cover, which that always kind of distracts me, and I don't mind a different pressing so much if it has the right cover. But I don't want to have that black and white cheesy looking cover. I hate how jazz record covers after 1970 are so awful. And that's part of why I stopped collecting jazz. Not the only reason, but jazz after 1970, the covers are so ugh. CTI is the only jazz label that's doing great album covers in the 70s. You know, I collected CTI and not Pablo. In retrospect, Pablo is probably a more serious jazz label, you know, with a greater pedigree, with more important jazz musicians, although CTI has some pretty impressive names. But Pablo's doing straight jazz, whereas CTI is doing this kind of cross pop, rock, R&B jazz that sold well and was beautifully packaged. And I love the packaging. And the CTI stuff was sampled a lot, so it leads you into wanting to hear what Bob James and Freddie Hubbard and those guys are doing at CTI. But so I really want to find that Dreamer record, and I prefer not to have to buy that French imposter of a cover. It just doesn't do it for me. And then there's a second Savoy, number 12,121 or 12,112. It's fairly early in that 100 sequence, and it's called Stablemates. And it's got the horse from a chess piece, from a chess game on the cover. And it has one side with Sahib Shihab and the other side with Yusuf Lateef. Each has a side. And it's a record that I've had chances to bid on. I bid on one last week, actually, and it went for $150. For a nice looking original, I bid, I think, 111, and it shot past that pretty quickly. So again, it's not something I want to spend too much on. I have seen Japanese pressings of it. In fact, the Japanese pressing of Stablemates came available probably about a month and a half ago. And the issue with Japan right now is the shipping's doubled because of COVID and whatever. And so what was a $35 record with $40 shipping? And then by the time I sat and waffled on it, someone else had bought it. I was like, golly, and it was probably listed for a day, maybe even half a day. And so there's obviously other people looking for Yusuf Lateef, more so than a Cesar Giovannini record. So Stablemates and The Dreamer by Yusuf Lateef are the two Savoys that I really want to complete, to have the first 150 Savoys under lockdown. And that leads to the last record on this list is Johnny Hartman's on the Regent label, which is the sister label of Savoy, actually. And he makes one title for Regent, probably 57. And then he moves on shortly after that to Bethlehem, makes some great titles there. And then, of course, his work with Coltrane. He has a great record at Roost as well, from probably 59. And he doesn't make a record for a couple years, and then Coltrane brings him into Impulse. And he has that great record with Coltrane. Then he makes a few more records for Impulse. And then Impulse, of course, was governed by ABC. He makes a few records for ABC that are really a little popular, but still great. And I have the Regent album as a Savoy later reissue with a shitty cover from the 80s. I'm such a fan of Johnny Hartman, I listened to his stuff enough that when I saw the Savoy issuing of, this is before I even knew about the Regent, really, I grabbed it. And then I realized sometime down the road that reissue was actually the old Regent album from 57. And I can't even think of the name of it right now. I can see the cover. It's got a gal on the cover with a teddy bear or something like that. Again, I have Discogs set up to alert me if one shows up. One hasn't showed up in a while. I haven't even had a chance to bid on that record. And it's weird because the old Bethlehems, you see them a lot more. The old Roost record, you see a lot more. That Regent one just probably didn't get the pressing numbers. It's been so elusive for me, and I'm a big Johnny Hartman guy. And I was a big Johnny Hartman fan for years because I was a Coltrane fan years ago. So Hartman becomes part of my universe years ago. So I've been collecting his stuff for a long time. And that Regent album has just never dropped into my lap. So that's the 5 records I most wanted that I got, and the 5 that I'm looking for that I have not been able to track down. If anybody can help me find any of those 5, it'll be greatly appreciated. Stay tuned for my next episode where I discuss 5 tone poets that I hope they put out in the next couple years. there's some great Blue Note Vault stuff that has either really awful covers or really hard to find imported pressings that deserve that lovely Tone Poet packaging and that fair price. It's really ridiculous now how some of those unissued Blue Notes that Japan put out, how expensive some of those 80s repressings have become. A lot of the sellers are just taking advantage of the demand for Blue Note, and that's part of the deal. But it makes sense that the old Blue Notes are as expensive as they are. They're rare, they're old. Few of them stayed in circulation in good condition. But to have some reissue program from the 80s that put stuff out in decent numbers, those records just shouldn't climb into the hundreds of bucks. They just shouldn't. But it's the nature of business, it's just what it is. So anyway, those are the 5 records I most want to shepherd, and the 5 I'm most happy I've added to my flock. And we'll talk about the Tone Poets in my next episode coming up. Y'all be safe. Appreciate you all. I've had a few Patreon people discontinue their pledging, and so I could use a few new Patreon supporters. If you're out there and if you enjoy the channel, enjoy the content and the work I put into this channel, as little as $5 a month. It's appreciated to help me keep this content going. Times are hard. As a DJ, I've not worked in a year. We're coming up on the year anniversary probably next week since I've had a gig. So unemployment's kind of gotten me through, sometimes better than others here in America. Some months have been tougher than others. My wife's coming to an employment crossroads right now as well, which is additional source of stress. So if anybody has it in their hearts to pledge a few dollars, or even to go to the merchandise page and buy a t-shirt or a hoodie, there's a lot of great designs there, probably 5 or 6 different ones, including the Jazz Vinyl Club Facebook jazz group that I own, that I run, and the Jazz Shepherd looks. There's a lot of different looks for that. So if you can't support the channel in any way, it's appreciated. And I don't want to talk about and beg for money very often. I try not to. Some channels seem to do it every episode, and that's just not why I do this. But at the same time, I want to have the time and the money to do it. And if I have to go get some 9 to 5, it's going to really cut into my channel's content and even my exhaustion levels. I got back problems, so if I have to go work a job, I'm not going to come home and want to make an episode if I'm in pain. So y'all be blessed, y'all be strong and safe. Let's get through this pandemic, and we'll see you all on the other side. Watch for my next episode, probably coming out, I'm guessing, probably Sunday-ish. Y'all be safe. Peace.